At my brother's wedding reception, my father stood up, lifted his glass, and said the words I had been hearing my entire life. Everything we built will belong to our son. He earned it. He's our pride. The guests clapped. My mother wiped tears from her eyes. My brother Daniel smiled like he had just conquered a kingdom. I didn't clap. I waited until the room settled and said calmly, "Dad, are you sure you checked the documents?" The music stopped. The clapping faded. My father's smile froze halfway across his face. Daniel turned toward me slowly. "What are you talking about?" I kept my voice steady. "I'm just asking. Did you check the ownership papers before announcing that?" 30 pairs of eyes locked onto me, and in that moment, I knew the truth I had carried for 3 years was about to breathe. Growing up, Daniel was the golden child. If he scored one goal in a school match, it was mentioned for weeks. If I came home with straight A's, my mother would say, "That's nice," while checking Daniel's schedule for practice. When Daniel wanted to start a business at 22, my parents emptied their savings to help him. When I received a scholarship to study accounting in another city, my father said, "Good, at least you won't cost us anything." I learned early that love in our house had conditions, and I did not meet them. Daniel failed twice in business. Each time my parents stepped in, loans, credit cards, mortgage extensions. When I asked for help paying for a professional certification exam, my father sighed and said, "We can't afford that right now." 2 weeks later, they bought Daniel a new car. I stopped asking for help. I moved out at 23 with 1 suitcase and a laptop. I worked days at a finance firm and nights doing freelance bookkeeping. I lived in a tiny apartment with paint and neighbors who argued through thin walls. No one visited, no one called unless Daniel needed something analyzed or calculated. But numbers do not lie. The numbers became my power. 3 years ago, Daniel's 3rd business attempt was failing. My parents were desperate. They refinanced their home. They took another loan. And without telling me, they added my name as a co-signer on part of the debt. I found out when a bank officer called me about a missed payment. My stomach dropped. I drove to my parents' house that night. Dad barely looked up when I asked why my name was on a business loan I had never agreed to. "It's family," he said. "It's temporary. Don't overreact." Daniel leaned back on the couch and laughed. "Relax, I'll make it big soon." That was the moment something in me shifted. Not anger, clarity. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I went home and requested every financial document tied to that business. Every share certificate, every registration form. Daniel had structured the company carelessly. My parents had transferred small percentages of ownership over time for tax reasons. And because of one rushed refinancing move, 10% of the company legally belonged to me. 10% can become controlling interest if you know what you are doing. Over the next 2 years, quietly, carefully, I bought small shares from silent investors who were tired of waiting for profits. I never told my parents. I never told Daniel. By the time the company finally stabilized last year, I owned 51%. They never checked. They never imagined I would. Now here we were. Daniel's wedding, crystal lights hanging from the ceiling, a live band, guests from both families filling the hall. My father cleared his throat again. "What documents are you talking about?" he asked, voice lower now. I reached into my handbag and placed a thin folder on the table beside the champagne glasses. "The company registration papers," I said calmly. "The updated ownership records." Daniel laughed loudly. "Oh my God, you're still bitter about that loan." "It's my wedding." I met his eyes. "This isn't about bitterness." My mother stepped closer. "Please don't ruin this night." "I'm not ruining anything," I replied. "I'm correcting something." I opened the folder. Inside were certified copies of the ownership structure. My name printed clearly beside majority shareholder. Daniel grabbed the papers. His smile faded as he flipped through them. "This is fake," he snapped. "It's registered. I said. Check the government seal. My father's face turned pale. That can't be right. It is, I answered. Silence wrapped around the room. Daniel's new wife looked between us, confusion replacing her wedding glow. You said you owned everything, she whispered to him. Daniel's jaw tightened. I do. No, I said softly. You manage it. I own it. Gasps spread through the guests. My father lowered himself into a chair. When did this happen? Over time, I replied. The same way my name ended up on your loan. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We trusted you. I held her gaze. And I trusted you not to use my name without permission. Daniel slammed the papers down. You planned this. Yes, I said. I planned to protect myself. The band members stood frozen on stage. My father's voice cracked. What do you want? There it was. The real question. I looked around. The hall, at relatives who had watched me fade into the background for years, at friends who only knew Daniel's version of success. I don't want revenge, I said. I want fairness. Daniel scoffed. Fairness? You ambushed me at my wedding. You announced ownership of something that isn't fully yours, I replied. I corrected the statement. My mother stepped forward, hands trembling. Are you going to take everything from your brother? I shook my head. No, I'm going to restructure the company properly. Transparent finances. No more personal expenses billed as business costs. And from now on, decisions require my approval. Daniel stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. You wouldn't dare, he said. I already did, I answered. My father covered his face. The guests began whispering. Daniel's wife slowly removed her hand from his arm. You told me the company was fully yours, she said quietly. Daniel had no answer. I closed the folder and stood up. I didn't come here to destroy anything, I said. I came to make sure I'm never collateral again. My mother sobbed softly. We always thought you were strong enough to handle things. I was, I replied. That doesn't mean it was fair. Daniel's anger shifted into something else. Fear. What happens now? He asked. Now, I said calmly, you run the company properly, and you answer to the majority shareholder. The weight of that sentence settled heavily. I picked up my handbag. Congratulations on your marriage, I added, and I walked out. 3 months later, the company looks different. Transparent accounts, balanced budgets, no hidden withdrawals. Daniel still runs daily operations, but every major decision comes through me. My parents downsized their spending. No more risky loans. We do not have long emotional talks. We do not pretend everything is perfect. But something changed. They checked documents. Now they ask before signing things. They speak to me differently, not with warmth, but with respect. Some nights, I sit on my balcony overlooking the city lights and think about that little girl who waited for approval that never came. She doesn't wait anymore. Daniel still tells people he built the business, and maybe he did, but paper beats promises, and silence does not mean weakness. It means preparation. Didn't destroy my family. I corrected the balance. And sometimes, that is enough.